So my experience related to race growing up is very much what you would just assume as a white majority culture. Racism or racial prejudice was always something that we tried to ignore, tried not to talk about. And so when you think of racism, you mostly think of something explicit, but for my cultural expression, my family expression, it always seemed more implicit. White people or white culture was good, and there were some that were bad, but black culture was bad, and there were some that ended up being good. And so it was just a strange, as I think back on some things that were said, some things that I said, just experiences that I had, you begin to see like, wait a second, that was actual racism, but it just always felt really normal, and just very kind of suppressed, and just tried our hardest to ignore it.
Yeah, in my experience with race growing up, I grew up in South Mississippi, so it was a lot more explicit probably than what Jeremy experienced. And so I grew up in a small town, but in the county that I lived in, there was a white school and a black school. It wasn't segregated, but for the most part, all the black kids went to one school and all the white kids went to another. And there were some black kids at my school, but it was a very small amount. And everyone that went to all the black kids that went to my school, all lived basically in the same area of town, and everyone called it the quarters. And even as a kid growing up, like, it was just normal. I mean, it's so derogatory, and it's, speaking of slavery quarters from, before, but I didn't even know that. Like, as a white kid, I didn't even realize. It never clicked for me. Because of our adoption and what our family looks like now, I'm now having to question things that I never questioned before. When you hear things that happens on the news, or you hear racial situations in the past, I would even have an opinion about the situation, but I very rarely ever verbalized it. I also never really thought about my opinion much past just initial thought. And so now I'm like having to think about those things and how they do affect my family.
So a great example for us, for me personally, is in the summer of 2013 is when the George Zimmerman verdict came down. And so he had killed Trayvon, and it was probably the first kind of in modern recent history, the first real white-black crime issue. And I remember having very strong opinions about how stand your ground laws, those sorts of things, that he was justified, that Trayvon was doing these things bad. Look at these pictures of him that you see on the news. But between Trayvon and then I think it was August of 2014 when Michael Brown was killed, in the middle of that we get placed with, we haven't finalized the adoption yet, but we get placed with these 3 young black children. So the difference between my experience with Trayvon and my experience with Michael Brown is now one of them is just a stereotype, one of them is just a person that I don't know. But when Michael Brown gets killed, now my son, I'm looking at him going, wait, that could have been him. What kind of prejudices were in play in that situation? And now I'm going, well, wait, how do I need to raise my son in such a way that teaches him how to avoid being in the situation that he was in? But then even after Michael Brown, I think it's November of 2014 when Tamir Rice was killed, a young 12-year-old boy in a park playing with a fake gun. Because he was a young black child with a gun, suddenly it means something different than to be a young, such as me when I was 12, playing with fake water pistols or fake pellet guns was a very normal thing. Now I'm having to go, well, wait a second, my African-American son isn't gonna have the same experience growing up as me. And now I don't have the luxury of ignoring implicit or explicit racial prejudice. Now this is a very real part of my life. And it's gonna have to play a real part in how I raise real children, not just stereotypes.
When we started the adoption process, we knew that we had prejudices that we were gonna have to work through. And we also didn't know all of the prejudices that we had that we were gonna have to work through. You know, it's like, you kind of surprises you when it comes up. You're like, whoa, that's a racist thing that I didn't even know that was in me. And the questions that come is like, why is that a big deal? And then you have to realize, like, we're not raising black kids to be white people. We're raising black kids to be their own person, but they have to be very well-rounded, and they're coming from a white family. And so, just want to be very conscious of how we raise them, and that we're very aware of where they came from, what the life situation is now, the culture that's around us now. And so you have to think about it a lot more, you know. You have to get other people's opinions. You know, you have to speak to your friends that are black and go, why is this a big deal? And give a voice to something that's never been a voice in your life before.
The adoption has just opened my eyes to more systemic issues where racism, yes, it's a person by person, case by case, but there are more systemic issues. You go to Walmart and there's food, but then there's ethnic food, and there's hair product, aisles and aisles of hair product. But whenever you buy hair product for young black boys or young black girls, you have a very small selection. It's very specific, and so it just opens your eyes to more issues that you could just have the privilege of ignoring before the adoption. What she said about having to kind of search our own hearts related to prejudices that we didn't even know existed. Actually, what helped me was I have a real list in my journal of memories and experiences that I had that I just had to work through with the Lord and just repent. Okay, I've said these things. I've had these other things said to me by spiritual leaders, by pastors, by people that I respect and I look up to, and that words matter. And those sorts of things, as they've come up, I've just had to address them. And some of them repent, some of them forgive the person that has said that to me, because those sorts of things, they past experiences and words can really shape your current opinions and who you are and how you even interact with people of a different race, of a different color.